We here at the BSA, we are pretty excited, particularly with the K-12 group, that we hope that we'll be returning to in-person meetings, probably in Q2, so in the next quarter. And of course, we're going to introduce tours as they come available, and as districts are willing to let a bunch of strange architects, mill about the building. We're hoping to get back to that. That's one of our more popular events. For now, we are obviously, staying remote, so we'll probably have a mix of hybrid meetings going forward. I'll also say that as we're going to get started here, cost is important. I think every person on this call, including I see a number of districts joining, has probably some thoughts, ideas. We could have drawn from a hat basically and had people present, I'm sure. But the folks joining us as panelists today have demonstrated some innovative cost-saving ideas, or have developed kind of a recurring pattern of cost efficiencies. So I'm pleased to welcome today our panelists that'll be sharing short presentations are Carl Franceschi. Everyone knows Carl from DRA, principal and a design team leader with over 40 years of experience and 100 such projects. We also have with us James LaPosta from JCJ Architecture. James is principal, chief architectural officer and design principal. Been with JCJ for 35 years, which is probably pretty close to the full career. I don't know, James. We're also joined by Pip Lewis, familiar face from HMFH Architects. Pip is a principal, takes pride in resolving complex projects. I know Pip has gotten his share of really tough urban challenges, so it'll be interesting to see what kind of creativity Pip can share with us. And we're also joined by Frank Tedesco, of course, of Mount Vernon Group. Mount Vernon Group was founded in 1954. I trust you didn't start with the original founding of the firm, Frank, but I know you've been there forever, for a very long time. We're pleased to have all four of you here with us. Ground rules, they're pretty typical. We're all familiar now with Zoom meetings. So what I think we'd like to do is we'll go in order that people were introduced, and they've got about a 10 or 15 minute presentation to demonstrate some of their thoughts and ideas, and or just conversation, verbally. But we'll take burning questions at the end of each of the short presentations, but I'd like to hold off for robust discussion at the end of all four presentations. I will also post in the link as we get started, in the chat, the link for CEUs. So those have been established, and so anybody that is looking for AIA learning credits, you'll be able to sign up for those. With that, I'll also just introduce myself, Robert Bell. I'm joined by Tina Stanislawski. We're co-chairs for the BSA K-12 knowledge community, and we're happy to take this topic to everybody. So with that, I'll say, Carl, you can kick us off, and hopefully you can share your screen. Great.
How's that, Bob? Can you see? Can you hear?
Yep, looks good. Hear you well.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. As you said, I think a lot of people could be in this position sharing their thoughts and ideas, because we don't have any magic bullets, and we're just happy to be part of the discussion here on this important topic. A couple of the ideas that I thought we'd share with you, so that there's no redundancy. I think you'll hear some different thoughts from the other panelists, but are shown on the screen there. The first one, it's kind of a big word, fiduciary attitude, but we think that that cost control starts with an entire team attitude, entire design team having the attitude that, we're acting in the best interest of our clients, but we're also, you might say, guardians of the public interest. We're spending taxpayers' dollars. We take that responsibility very seriously, and we try to instill that in all our team members. After all, as we all know, the money that's funding these school projects in particular is all of our money. It's taxpayers' money, and so we need to act in that way. I know a lot of architects, we realize that our buildings are kind of in the public realm. And in that sense, it's not just the owner's interest that we're representing, but all of the public in that regard. And we think that same attitude can carry over into the care for cost control. A major topic I want to talk about is doing more with less, I guess is kind of the catchphrase. But and for us, it starts with considering the total project, that we're not just trying to manage the cost per square foot of the buildings we're designing, but we're thinking about the total project size and scope. And it starts in programming phase. We think that there are a lot of opportunities to save costs by keeping the overall project size limited to what's truly needed. And so I think a lot of us understand, there are ways to do that. There are ways to think about multi-purpose spaces, about making buildings more efficient, using circulation space in a productive way, that it's part of the programming. And taking the long view too, we say, this is always a challenge for all of us, as you know, when we're designing a project, we interview the current staff and the current administration and teachers, and we try to, respond accordingly. But at the same time, we need to take the longer view that, this building's going to be there for 50 years. The staff is going to change. Teachers are going to change. Educational modalities are going to change. The building needs to be flexible in that regard. And to us, flexible often means simpler or maybe more generic in a sense. And often by avoiding kind of what we refer to here as over customization, we end up with buildings that maybe in the long run serve the communities better and turn out to be actually more affordable. Obviously, a lot of us know some of these multi-purpose spaces that can result in more efficient buildings, and student commons are certainly one of the most effective ones that we all employ these days. They are spaces, a lot of it is circulation space. It's in the net to gross ratio in some respect. They're lobbies, they're gathering spaces, they're obviously dining spaces. If they're associated with the assembly spaces of gym and auditorium, they can be pre-function kind of spaces and so forth. So it's a great example of using program spaces in a number of ways to keep the overall project size down and also result in, it can be very exciting functional spaces in a project. The other thing in terms of doing more with less is and I think most of us, thanks to the MSBA's process, we do take renovation seriously. We don't, approach every project with the preconception that we want to do some, great new architecture always with new construction replacing an existing building. We think there's value in existing buildings, and they deserve, serious consideration for renovations. And from a design point of view, we know that, with a few well-positioned strategic additions to a project, you can really change the nature of an existing building if that's one of the goals, and it often is, that we want the building to sort of represent the educational program inside, to be a place of civic pride and so forth. And so it does call for some strategic moves, but it doesn't necessarily call for the replacement of the entire building always. And of course, as you hear, I think from others too, of course, renovation, saving the existing building, saves that embedded energy from a sustainability point of view. One other topic I want to touch on in terms of doing more with less is finishes in a project tend to be an easy target for value management, value engineering, whatever we want to call it these days when we're trying to trim budgets. We actually hit upon a strategy years ago of considering eliminating finishes in some places, not just switching to less expensive ones. But when we were dealing with some large, career tech vocational schools and how to consider economically enclosing the volumes of spaces that those shops require, with durable finishes required on the inside, and obviously energy efficient and tight buildings on the exterior, we started looking at precast, insulated precast sandwich panels shown in that section there, where the inside concrete finish could be exposed in lieu of adding concrete block. And the exterior precast has some pretty good design capabilities on the exterior, and it provides the vapor barrier insulation all in one, and it also has the advantage of, we'll talk about in a moment, of saving time, of enclosing the space quickly, often eliminating winter conditions and things like that. And it can be erected in winter, although caulking obviously has to be done in warmer weathers. But and then that interior finish can simply be painted and become the interior. And we discovered too, not only in the shops, but in projects where we're stacking classrooms above shops, we actually use the inside concrete finish as the finish in those classrooms. So there's no drywall, no metal studs on the perimeter wall. Again, kind of doing more with less, using one material and exposing, you might say, the structure somewhat in the same way that people, are attracted to polished concrete floors. Why add a finished material? Use the concrete itself as the finish. And then to touch upon time, particularly, these days, as once again, escalation, inflation is affecting our projects in a very serious way. Saving time is a way to save money. And that includes in the design phases, of course, not just the construction phases. And a couple of things we do regularly is overlapping activities during the design phase. We're doing programming the same time we're checking out existing conditions. We're doing conceptual design while we're still refining the program often. And there are ways to, reasonably save, fairly significant time during design phase. And then thinking about the construction phase, which is a longer period of time generally, trying to simplify and develop logical, constructible sequences and procedures, material choices, systems choices. We find we want to include people on our design team, both in-house and out of house, who have that constructability, have that construction experience to have input in a lot of the choices being made early on in conceptual design even. So we do include, our project managers often act as construction administrators. They bring back that feedback from the field so that we try to develop and design buildings in a way that, can be logically built and built then, more expeditiously. And of course, using early bid packages where that makes sense is a way to overlap, you might say, construction activities with design activities too, another time and cost saving strategy. And just to touch on briefly about estimating, obviously very important skill and talent to have on the team. And we consider that talent both in our in-house personnel and in independent cost estimators that we all use. And involving them, we say at every major decision point in the project. So that, when we're thinking about programming, we're thinking about cost. When we're thinking about conceptual design options, we're thinking about cost and certainly down the line at major material choices, major systems choices. And again, we think about total cost, not just cost per square foot. And when we're making these decisions, it's not always on the lowest first cost. We really emphasize the word value in evaluating these decisions, because there's value and there may be secondary benefits in time or constructability, the sequence, and so forth, where a slightly more expensive system or material may have secondary benefits that overall reduces the total project cost. And then last, just to touch on again, something we all deal with is, what delivery, building delivery system should we recommend on a project, construction management or design bid build. And there are certainly pros and cons to each of those, as we all know. We just urge everyone to think about making an informed decision, truly understanding the cost implications, because I think it's clear that obviously a CM comes with pre-construction services. Those come with some added costs. Certainly they bring added value, and that's where we just want to weigh those benefits against the costs. And certainly in a phased complex renovation project, CM makes a great deal of sense and adds a lot of value to a project, reduces the owner's risk, reduces disruption. But there are times when with a little more effort on the design team and incorporating some of that constructability thinking, we can put together a good tight set of plans and specs and go the design bid build route, which often results in lower costs. So those are the thoughts I wanted to share with you. I'm anxious to hear what others have to say and to be part of the discussion too. So thanks.
Great.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Carl.
Okay.
As I said, we'll, if there are burning questions relevant to what was just presented or clarifications, I would encourage folks to, the protocol would be to put it in the chat so that we can kind of handle it in order. We have a number of people on, upward close to 50. So raising hands might not be the best way to catch everybody. And feel free to put your questions in as we go. We'll circle back and field them and give you a chance to speak. Next up, we have Jim LaPosta. Jim, are you able to share?
I should be able to. Okay,
Great.
we shared.
You're there.
All right, great. I'm also proud that I unmuted in advance, so I'm feeling pretty good about today. It's off to a good start.
Batting
So,
100.
yeah. Yeah. We'll see how this goes. So thanks, everybody. And I think, as Carl said, anybody on this call could probably be making this presentation. We all have experience doing it, so I'm thrilled to share some thoughts on how we've approached controlling costs on our projects, both schools and otherwise. I'm going to cover three topics today. Simplifying the structure, multitasking spaces, which is a little bit of I think repetitive of what Carl was talking about, and design for constructability, which is a topic that we spend an awful lot of time on. I want to preface this by saying I think one of the real challenges is just to be rigorous about this from the beginning of the project. Draconian is a good word. I mean, when we have team meetings and we start to hear things like, well, we could just, or it will only, or well, the contractor might. That's a red flag for us, and we need to pull back, because every little decision we make adds up to a value engineering conversation down the road. So we really do work hard at the rigor, and I think that's just one of those things we all have to work at. So just some right there we go. Yeah, so some examples, when we talk about from the very beginning, dumb diagram, but the idea of keeping the structure simple. We used to have a senior designer here called himself the grid Nazi, but that was right around the time the soup Nazi was popular on Seinfeld. But it was true, because early in the project, he set up a rigorous grid to his projects, which I really appreciated. And if you could stick to that, that helped control the cost of construction. It controlled the square footage of the building, and it gave you a rigor to push against, right, in terms of design. And I think we all agree that having something to push against makes a better building. If you got a big open field with, I think the hardest project I ever built was a high school in a tobacco field in Connecticut. I didn't know what to do with it. It was just a big flat open plain, and there was nothing, we're looking for a hill. I really wanted a hill. So the question is, what do you do then? And you can carve spaces out, get a rigorous, simple grid, don't get too clever with it, and then begin to carve the spaces out of the inside and even expose the grid. This example at the Hunking and Haverhill was one of those an example where rigorous grids, simple building, but within there spaces that could be that could still be light-filled, fun, joyous, letting some of the structure be exposed, getting interior daylight, getting flexibility, getting visibility, but you can carve away at those without having to really mess around with the structure. And it gives you a lot more flexibility if your base building is simple to build and repetitive and somewhat rigorous. Other examples, if you want to look at a way to combine buildings with renovation, up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, we had a renovation addition project, and this is about using residual space, right? So this was about the yellow being the existing building, two very simple, almost box-like additions that are in blue, and then this triangular piece in the middle on this really tight urban site. That just becomes the residual space in between these really simple boxes to build. You're sort of connecting the dots. And this becomes a space that then is relatively inexpensive because you're not spending money. You're getting an exciting space, kind of connecting the dots for the cost of a curtain wall and a few trusses, because the building around it is simple and easy to build. So you're able to sort of focus your energies and your attention in a very, very specific area. This project freaked out the construction manager when we first showed him the plan when they joined. So they saw angles and they were, quite upset. So it was going to be very expensive. This is an elementary school. But the reality is it's a series of boxes. So it's sort of in a new building taking that same approach of a simple structure. It's 6 boxes that are just connected then by storefront to create some exciting space. What this allowed us to do by keeping the structure simple and repetitive and the form simple and repetitive really allowed us to kind of go vertical, right? And play around with the section and create this village atmosphere really inexpensively with just connecting, again, these boxes, these simple boxes with storefront. And it was just a question of kind of leading the CM through this. And once they understood the approach, they said, well, yeah, this really isn't too bad. We're building 6 rectangular buildings, and then we're just running a foundation wall and some structure in between. And you can with that, again, in these residual spaces, kind of create some really interesting indoor-outdoor relationships and maybe spend a little bit more on the structure connecting, because the structure in the majority of the building really was extremely, extremely simple. Last example for this topic, I think it's the last example, is this project, a whole campus that we just finished. Now this kind of gets at the time as money too. This is a really simple plan. It's for a Native American community south of Phoenix. This whole project it's about 125,000 square foot elementary school, 14 months from the time we were hired to the day the school opened. So that required a lot of early packages and a lot of thought about the structure and the systems that were available in the community. So this ended up being a bearing wall CMU project with joists, right? And it had to be kept simple. So as you can see from the plan, if you're doing bearing wall and you're doing joists, the more repetition, the better, the simpler it can be. It could be a really boring project. Luckily, it's a lot of outdoor space, so you can take advantage of creating things like courtyards. But what this allowed us to do was to have them build the classroom buildings and sort of the base of this, and then have a moment in each courtyard where you could actually spend some money and do something exciting, because the rest of the building was so repetitive and so based around kind of the systems that were available in that particular community. So every kind of cluster of classrooms ends up with a common space. And even here, it was a switch of structure. So they were able to do this sort of the wrapper first, and then they came back in later with the longer lead items in terms of the structure that for these butterfly rooms. So this became a question of working early with the construction manager to make sure that we were selecting systems that they could get quickly, build quickly, and build cheaply. And the repetition was really part of that. But again, I think through section, you can begin to create some really wonderful and kind of joyful spaces. So something we were calling multitasking spaces, I mean, very similar to multi-use spaces. I want to maybe expand on that a little bit. So in this case, this was a middle school that really couldn't afford the programmatically the choral room that they needed. They had a big band and choral program, but programmatically they were up against the money. So this was a case, as I'm sure we've all done, of using the stage to create an extra teaching space. But I think the question here, which is at the top, the question here really was, how do you do that and make it a real teaching space and not just a stage with chairs? So that involved making sure it was on an outside wall, making sure it had a window, making sure it had all the things it needed, and then spending a little money on an acoustic partition between that and the commons, so that when it wasn't being used as a stage, it was truly a teaching space, which it is most of the time. They used it as a stage rather infrequently. So this is that space. Again, it's the residual space between some very simple masses. This is in the stage configuration. And then when you know, for lunch, when it's a classroom, it's simply a door that's got a very high STC. Spend the money on that detail as opposed to on an entire extra room. And it's been a quite successful and rather cost-effective space. Similar idea here, where when you don't have a commons, but you need some additional space, we've done this quite a bit. The idea of the, and I'm sure many people have done this, but just of opening the cafeteria to the gym. And then in this case, we added a couple of monitors, right? We've all been in hotel ballrooms where you have the cameras set up. So here they invested in a system of cameras and monitors. So if you're sitting at the back, you can still see what's going on, just to make it a more functional space and a better space for folks to use when they did want to seat. This overall seats about 1,000 people when things are open, and they can get a large community meeting, or everybody can come to the holiday concert instead of having to do it in shifts. And with the camera, you get to see your kid. And then the last, multitasking, really has to do not with the space, but with, in this case, grabbing daylight. In this area, we had to go internal for the breakout space. We just couldn't get a kind of external window, but by oversized doors on the stairwells, on hold opens, glass stairwells, which most of us do, and then a little bit of borrow light from a breakout space, you can begin to multitask the stairwell as a light source and the other room as a light source, so that you still get that brightness, the visibility outside, without having to, you know, spend the money to be on an outside wall and maybe increase the size and footprint of the building. And all these big moves are the things that we think help control costs. Oh, and then this one, this is a multitasking. Again, the STEM space, just through the use of a garage door and a folding indoor partition, this supports the outdoor agricultural program, as well as having space available to the common space on the inside. So again, it's trying to strategically locate spaces in a way that you can just open them up, and this is used for a variety of different programs during the day and not owned by a specific teacher. And just by opening and closing doors, it becomes a very flexible and very multi-use space. And then lastly, I just got three more slides, and a lot of it's back to the constructability question, but it's the idea of early on thinking about the production of how this is going to go. This is a dumb slide, which I know we all know, but it's that wood wall. Super important in this particular project, this acoustic wall. But the space ended up being tweaked to be designed around the system, right? Around the proportions and the panel size, so that we weren't going to be cutting panels, because coming in and laying this wall out, and this was a small addition, which didn't have a lot of money, laying the wall out without any cutting saved a boatload of money and allowed us to use a higher end material. I'll tell you, the first drawing didn't do that. There was a lot of cutting and fussing. So we just simply adjusted the size of the space for that consideration. Similarly, and this is a big one, we've had a lot of conversation with CMs on this, production on the outside, whether it's masonry or curtain wall, simple repetition on the exterior of the building, you know, picking your moments at an entry. This happens to just be the back of a building. And in this case, super simple, repetitive. And the mason said we were able to put crews out there and just blow through this because the dimensions were right. It was thoughtfully put together. Everything, you know, there was very little cutting, and we could just get a crew out there and really move on it. And the last slide is similar idea on this school, but in this case with a rain screen system. But again, tweaking and designing the building around the systems to make sure that when the crew gets on site, production goes fast, and there's no stopping and starting and the need to remobilize. So it's back to that idea of thinking early on about how the building's going to be built, even back in schematic design, and making big decisions that are going to keep you from having to kind of death by 1,000 cuts through the value engineering process. So that's it. It's what I got. I'm sure anybody could have given that, but I appreciate the chance to share some thoughts.
Oh, this is great. Just curious, it's not a burning question, but did your grid master come up with a preferred 30 by 30 or something? Just
No, no, not really. Just as long as it was consistent, right? I mean, and that's what we've heard from most of the engineers and contractors. As long as it's consistent and rigorous about it, not one at 30, one at 22.8, one at, we all know, right? The problem with Revit is you draw it and then you add the dimensions later, and you're doing half-inch and eighth-inch dimensions on structural grids, which makes absolutely no sense. So just get it regular and get it systematic.
excellent. Great insights.
All right.
Next up, we're going to move on to Pip. Are you ready to share some of your thoughts?
Yes. So,
You're sharing. Great.
and of course, I'm sharing from the back of the presentation, unfortunately. Let me see. Okay. So I thought Carl and Jim did a great job of giving a great overview of all the things we have to wrestle with as architects, trying to make these public schools cost effective. And what I wanted to do here is sort of focus on one aspect, which is how a way of looking at sustainable aspects of a building in terms of cost effectiveness. However, I do want to start by first touching on a couple of our buildings, just to talk about some of the experiences we've had in very simplistic ways. As people have said, anybody here could cover, just wrestling with how we were assuring the communities that we were doing cost-effective buildings. The first is the Carver Elementary School, where we were brought into town after Carver had voted down their new elementary school
Hey, Pip.
twice.
Just want to make sure you're on the slide. I'm seeing the Josiah Quincy.
Oh, let's see why that is.
Tina, is that what you're seeing?
Yep,
There
now
you
you're.
So I'm going to unshare and share again. But I should be sharing Acrobat Reader.
You got it, Pip. I saw Carver pop up there. You're good.
Okay, all right. I don't know what I did the last time. Maybe I clicked on what I didn't realize I was clicking on. Sorry about that.
No problem.
And I will go to full screen mode. Okay, so Carver invited us into town at a time when they had this project voted down twice. So we really had to assure the community their money was being spent wisely. And so this is really a story about very simple shapes, simple, inexpensive, but durable materials. And because, as was touched on, I think by Carl, this is a pretty straightforward building on an open site, two-story elementary school. It was done in Chapter 149, not CM at risk, but design, bid, build. And we think that the competition that we saw there really helped to drive down the costs of this project, which came in at $338 a square foot, and it was completed in 2019. But it's as you can see, the building is clad in concrete block, which we use a few different textures and colors and patterns in order to make it, give it some life. And it has moments of really inexpensive metal siding to accentuate that. Inside of the building, we created this fantastic library that people really love, but really it's just a cube of old-fashioned cow wall to create this sort of crystal enclosure for the library.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I don't think your screen is progressing, or maybe it's just mine. I still just see the first page.
Oh, geez. Well, let me do then once again. Sorry.
Pip, we're not seeing the full screen. If you went
Yeah.
into
So
full
hold
screen
on.
mode- Yeah.
I'm gonna just share my desktop rather than trying to share the program and see if that works.
That's
Yeah,
working.
you see that? Okay. This, sorry about that. Hopefully this will work, but here you see the concrete block building with a few moments of metal panel. And if we proceed, we get to the library, which is a cow wall, an old-fashioned, I call it cow wall enclosure, but in this case used to a wonderful effect to create a really uplifting library inexpensively. And we, out on Route 1 in Saugus, we have recently completed the Saugus Middle High School. Happy to know that it just got its LEED Platinum certificate. And we always show this photograph of it because it's such a sexy photograph of this vessel, I call it, that encloses the auditorium and the library. But it's actually the element at the front of the building. And if you look at the building itself, it's actually mainly a couple of large boxes of flat roof, regularly shaped brick-clad building. We have found that repeatedly masonry, either CMU or brick, as we look at so many different materials to clad a school with, repeatedly comes up as the most economical. It's very durable and low maintenance, which I think is part of cost effectiveness. And another thing that we find is that the communities it's attractive and communities tend to love it and accept it very well. We find we're able to do certain special details, as you see on the brick, that can dress up a simple brick enclosure without causing a large increase in the cost. Inside of the building, just a couple of things to touch on, because the previous speakers went into great detail on how we work to simplify costs and get the best use out of space. But one of the ways of ensuring that a new school building doesn't look institutional is by the treatment of the corridor spaces. And we can talk about light and things like that, but I'm just wanting to talk about durable materials here so it doesn't get beat up. And we have found just repeatedly that ceramic tile is actually still a very cost-effective way of providing a very durable, long-lasting, and attractive way of protecting the surfaces on a corridor, particularly when a lot of the corridor space is taken up by lockers. Another way of protecting walls with wainscoting that we've used is by using the linoleum, as you see here, which actually comes from the floor and rolls up the wall. Cost-effective, inexpensive way to introduce some color into a corridor and make a very durable application. And then we have found on recent projects that using these larger graphic installations of these applied vinyl graphic material, we can easily, as you see on the right-hand side, take a very plain space and dress it up and sort of make it sort of address the subject of the education that's going on there and be correct for the age of students. On the left, this large picture is the Annie B. Fales School in Westboro, which is an early elementary school. building. And this is one of several of these sort of applied murals that we use through the building in order to represent the different environmental areas, from uplands to wetlands to the seashore and even to under the sea. And here we gave the school mascot, Annie the Hedgehog, sort of new life as she appears in all of the murals, journeying through them. And we find that this was inexpensive and the kids love it. And it's educational also. It ties in with their educational theme. Now, the thing about the Fail School is an interesting project, because the town really wanted to do a net zero building, and it's sitting on a steeply sloped, beautiful site with lots of trees and things like that around. And so from the very beginning, we wanted to shape the building to take advantage of the views that were downhill to the east of the building, and the sun, obviously, to the south. And that helped us shape the way this building was going to look. It's occupied now, but we're still working on the site is still coming together this spring. The building, we're happy to say, has turned out to be not net zero, but the MSBA's first net positive school building, where we're generating more electricity than we're using. But in order to do that, this is very important to the community. In order to do that, there's various components, geothermal, photovoltaics, that had to be worked into the building. We had to meet our budgets. That meant that the cost management that we needed to do for the project really needed to occur in other places. And so what we did is, while we used some this wood panel-like material, it's actually not wood, it's phenolic resin, to sort of reflect the natural emphasis that the school has, or the emphasis on nature that the school has. But we concentrated that at important places on the school. And when you look at the school, the main classroom wings are really these large expanses of very straightforward concrete block to act as background to the emphasis that we were trying to make. And in that way, other ways, like with using the graphics inside, we were able to keep the costs of the building down. But I wanted to focus at this point on specifically on the photovoltaics for the building. And you can see the building is really designed around those photovoltaics. And the question is how the community could wrestle with the cost of paying for this system on their building. The way that I have traditionally looked at it is a simple payback model, where you take the cost of the system. In this case, it was a little bit over $1 million. And you look at the annual cost of the energy, or the savings of the energy that's made on a yearly basis. And in the 172,000. And in this particular case, that meant it would take 6.2 years to pay back the cost of the $1 million investment. So would the community go for this? Well, that's a pretty good number for Westboro, but 6.2 years in order to be getting your money back, the answer was maybe, maybe not. But the town and HMFH looked at it very differently, because we realized that in actuality, nobody puts down $1 million to pay for photovoltaics or anything. This is a part of a $50 million project that was paid by municipal bond over 20 years. So the community said that the real thing they want to look at is the impact of that $1 million on the photovoltaics, financed over 20 years, compared to the energy that it's generating. And in this particular case, we saw that Westboro was able to have a 2% bond, over 20 years, the cost of that $1 million system was $65 million. And as we showed before, we were generating 173,000. I said $68 million, $68,000. We're generating $173,000 every year. And so the savings to the community is $108,000 every year. And this starts year one. And so the community said, is this a go? And the answer was, heck yes. But Westboro was in a very good position because they were able to get a bond at a really low interest rate at 2%. So I wanted to take a look at what the impact would be if that interest rate were not nearly as favorable and was in fact doubled. So I looked at a 4% bond. And that does indeed change things, but it doesn't change things that much. The cost to repay the bond every year for that $1 million system is about $78,000, as you see here. You're still making $178,000, and so there's still a significant savings to the town every year. And so this can really be a constructive way of looking at the actual operation costs of the project versus the capital costs of building it, particularly since the capital cost is generally financed with the clients that we work with. This is a very simplified model because there may be other costs involved, but I just wanted to get that that point across. And then I want to show you a very different project that we're working on now. Talking about the complex urban projects. This is the Quincy Upper School, which is just starting to come up now in Chinatown of Boston. And as you see, it's a high-rise school with a pretty complex section indicated here. And we have attempted to put what photovoltaics we could on top of the building while sharing the rooftop with an open air educational space, because this is the only open space that the project will have. And we found we were able to squeeze in some, but even that we could get in was pretty expensive because it had to be built on steel structure supported over the rooftop HVAC equipment. And so when we look at the numbers for that, it's very different than what we saw at Westboro. While the system itself costs about $600,000 to build, we were generating about a third of the electricity that the failed school was actually generating. And with a 20-year bond for the city at a 4% rate, the cost of that was $42,000 per year, which is still sort of favorable compared to the energy generated at $69,000 a year. So the city could be saving $26,000 or $27,000 every year. However, this is a huge expensive project, and it was being designed right in the middle of the post-pandemic and supply chain problem escalation that we were seeing. So the city determined that no, the savings here are too modest. They would take that $600,000 as one of many value engineering measures that needed to be taken in order to make the building come in on budget. So we are doing the building now without the photovoltaics. But we also had to, in order to get on budget, we had to cut back the size of that rooftop open space that we have. It's still there, but smaller than what we were hoping to do. And what the city hoped would be a slick glass box sitting on top of these beautiful terracotta masses became, once again, like a lot of public schools, became a brick masonry building. That was the most economical way of building this, even in downtown Boston. And the terracotta masses became an industrial metal siding where we just mixed up some standard profiles in order to give it a nicer look than usual. So remarkably, we have been able to stick to the original budget for Quincy Upper despite the difficult times that we're working through. And it's still scheduled, despite the supply chain problems, to be open the summer of 2024. So it really was the pandemic that sort of forced the city and HMFH to really look deeply at ways to make this an extremely cost-effective building in order to make it actually fly. And so the ground was broken last fall, and you can see this third grader here is very thrilled and looking forward to when he gets into the sixth grade, and he'll be able to inaugurate this first exciting new full service middle and high school in downtown Boston that really was shaped by the cost effectiveness that was imposed by the pandemic in a funny way. And that's my presentation. So thank you. Sorry for all the technical problems at the beginning, clicking on the wrong thing to share.
No problem. That's great. That's really interesting, Pip. Thank you so much for sharing. It's good to see the kids at the end of it too. So last but not least, Frank Tedesco will share. Frank, I don't know if you have slides or.
I have a couple of PDFs I could put up.
Okay.
I share the screen. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Let's see. I don't know how to put this up on.
I don't know if another option, Frank, would be if you wanted to email it to myself or Tina.
Okay.
I might be able to pull it up.
All right. So. So do I have your email?
Yes, I think it'll also be Susan Green sent us all an updated email this morning, so I'll be in that email string as well.
Sorry about this. So.
I'll shoot you a quick email too, just to make it convenient.
Let's see if I got it here.
While we're waiting for that, if again, I've got some questions that have come in just to me. If anybody,
Go ahead and do that till I get this straightened out. I'd appreciate it.
sure. Please put them in the chat. And Katie, it looks like you're keeping us busy. You had some questions, maybe wanting to hear a little bit more about the success and pitfalls with early bid packages and design bid build delivery method. I can just start by saying that that could be a whole session unto itself, for sure. But any of the panelists want to chime in on some of the successes and pitfalls.
Nice.
Well, I can say, because we're working with the Quincy Upper School right now, and we have 6 early bid packages on the project, where something approaching half the project was bid before the 100%. Very different delivery than we're used to. Really kept us all on our toes. I think what is really important with early bid packages is to remember to impress upon the owners that as you complete the documents, there will be changes. So for our early bid packages, when we worked in Brookline, we actually had the owner set aside a little pocket of money to use for steel changes that we knew would occur as the HVAC drawings and things like that were completed as we moved toward 100%. And on Quincy Upper, that's been even more important because things went out at 60% construction documents. And so as we move toward 100%, and have resolved various coordination issues with mechanical systems and electrical systems, resolved details with the steel that weren't completed at 60%. All of those can affect the cost of the building. Hopefully a good CM is carrying the proper allowances to cover for that, but it really, you have to educate your client to expect that. You get some great advantages from going out to bid early in terms of getting things moving early. People have talked about the importance of shortening the construction schedule and getting things done. And particularly in these times of very strong construction escalation, you want to get the building done as quickly as you can. So there's a great advantage there, but you need to educate the client in terms of the pitfalls also.
I'd
Excellent.
like to pick up on what Pip said and just said we have to educate our teams too. We do a lot of early packages across the practice in different project types. And I think you just have to get to the point where you understand what's gone out, kind of what's locked in, if you can keep it locked in. And if you're completing design and you've got a steel and a foundation package that's out and under bid, you just have to almost treat it like it was an existing building that you're renovating, right? And just work around what's there and not decide you want to change it if unless there's an awfully good reason. So some of it's just a mindset in design of understanding ahead of time what's going out and then altering your workflow to treat things as sacrosanct. They're just, yeah, I'd love to move that, but we can't. So let's do something great with it in place.
Excellent.
In addition to, Bob, I don't know if the question had to do also with early bid packages specifically for design bid build, which is a whole nother layer of complications, obviously, where in essence, the design team, the OPM are kind of assuming some of the responsibility that a CM would have in trying to anticipate, constructability issues of issuing, say, a site preparation package to a site contractor as the prime, and then, several months later, issuing another lump sum design bid build contract to a GC. You now have to, as Jim just mentioned, you have to update the existing conditions to almost as if it's an existing building that the contractor is inheriting.
Okay, I think we're ready. Bob, do you have my emails?
I do, Frank. And Katie, just to round that out, I don't know if you can unmute yourself, but I think what Carl was saying was to the heart of some of your question as well.
Yes, definitely. I think CM at risk is its own animal in terms of early bid packages, but in terms of design bid build, it's about, I think Carl discussed it well in terms of that shifting of responsibility to the architect in that respect. So it's possible, but it's a lot of work to do that well. Thank you.
And the other thing, Katie, too, like obviously in Massachusetts, to think about our filed subbids. Sometimes the early site packages require, coordination with plumbing lines that, is going to be a future filed subbidder who's not even on the team yet, is another added layer of complexity that, as Jim said, the owner would be wise to set aside an allowance to anticipate changes to deal with that kind of condition.
Good point, Carl. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready? Can you share that first videos there, Bob? I mean, not video, but the PDFs I sent.
Tina, it looks like Bob fell off.
What happened to Bob? Well, anyway, I could start until he gets back. Cost escalation has been going on, and there've been all kinds of explanations, and nobody really knows. It seems like it's like a hurricane, it just kind of happens, or even a tsunami. But then I heard something at one of the designer selection members, not an MSBA person, but one of the members said something about cost control is something that any architect can do. And I agree with that. I think it's true. I guess the question is, well, then why are we having all this problem with cost control if we can all do it? And my esteemed colleagues have pointed out many of the reasons that we can, are the techniques and the approaches we can use for strategizing how to save money. Pip mentioned design, build, bid, build as a way of controlling costs in a way, because I think that's always been the elephant in the room. And we know that CM at risk, it adds money to any project. I mean, it's very rare that you'll find a CM at risk project being on the lower end of the spectrum. Whereas over the years, I mean, all of us have had good projects and projects that have been more expensive than we've liked. But I will say for Mount Vernon Group, our projects have consistently been under the average. And we basically are at a point where there is a...
Frank, do you want me to pull up some slides? I'm back.
Yeah, pull up the first one I sent, just one of the photos that would be helpful. Thank you. Well, I don't know where Revere High School came from. Okay, that's one. This is just the graph that shows our projects over the last few years are below the average. The average cost is that gray line. And I just wanted to point out the one on the far right, which is Lawrence. It's the lowest in the section. It's at $440 a square foot. And if you could, I have a short video of that project that I sent you. Rob?
Yeah, I can pull it up. There probably is going to be an audio issue. I'm not sure.
No, there's no audio with it. So this is the new Leahy Elementary School in Lawrence. As you can see, it's a curb-to-curb urban project with all of the urban issues that you have in any city, where you really don't have any site space, no laydown area, and so forth. The project is at $440 a square foot. It has rooftop play area and various other things that need to accommodate the students in an urban setting. And so what my point is, though, even though that was showing the lowest cost of all of the projects in this cycle, you can see that this is not a inferior project by any stretch of the imagination. So I would say that that would do that. If you could show one of the photos I had on the first, not this one, but I think I had another email with photos on it. Okay, this is a project we've just completed in Wareham. Came in $12 million under budget. I think I have a couple more photos of it there. These we use terrazzo and everywhere throughout this project. And it still came in 12 million under. We use granite curbing on a very large site. So the point is that you can come in, and if architects can all do this, if they put their minds to it, and I believe they can, we should all be trying to beat that average cost and come in lower and still produce what I consider very fine architecture. And I can assure you that the communities are very happy with the buildings that we give them. So again, part of this whole conversation has to do, I think, with all the fine things that my colleague said. That's what we have to do to save costs, but why aren't we doing it? That's really the question. Why are some projects coming in twice the amount of some of the ones that we're doing and others are doing? So some of us have to do a little soul searching about that. As architects, aren't we responsible to the client for saving money. And I think this is what this particular conversation is about. It's not so much about design. You want to have great design and you want to reflect the community as much as possible. Well, I did a check with the 5 of the contractors that follow our projects over the years quite a bit. And that included Fontaine Brothers, Agostini, and Brate Brothers, CTA, and a few others. I tried to ask them, why do you bid our projects and how come we keep coming in lower than many of the other projects in the same years? And they gave me a couple of reasons that seem to be common amongst all of them. One of them was that, and I think this, everybody knows this, that the documents are clear and well coordinated, and they're easy to build. So, I mean, over the years, we've developed, and I know we all have, ways to, and some of the colleagues have pointed it out, ways of saving money in the way that you're organizing your buildings. So this is true, and they look for that. And the reason is, they also like the fact that we did use masonry a lot. And I like masonry. I think masonry is a great product, and somehow it's fallen in ill favor. So we use panels, for accents and things. But I was, before I became an architect, I was in the panel business. And I can tell you, there's about 100 things that happen with panels, and 99 of them are bad. The panels they look great for a while, and after a while they start changing, and you can't really go in and fix them later. So, and the contractors reflected this. They said when there are panels, it delays everything. They are delayed on the job. They can't get in, they can't close in, because the panel companies won't begin manufacture of their panels until all your steel is up and a survey is done of the steel with exact dimensions on it. Otherwise, they won't even start fabricating. So that delays the whole getting into the building. So I would just suggest, as an important suggestion that was brought up by 5 contractors, that the panels cause a problem. And that adds to the cost, because it adds to the time, it adds to the difficulty, it adds to hard coordination. The final thing that they all seem to agree on that was important was the relationship during construction between the architect and the contractors. We all know that, they are they are a breed apart. They're not like architects, they're different. But we have a way of communicating with them. And the best thing we can do is to help them build the building. And that's always been our philosophy, it's just to help the contractor, whoever it is, build the building and do what you can. Turn around the RFIs and the submittals and shop drawings and things like that. Sounds pretty perfunctory, but they found that was a very important part, that they get their answers quickly. So those are the things. So the whole discussion about cost has to do with architects. It begins and ends with us. We can control the costs. I've proven it over many years now doing this. We've always controlled the costs. My colleagues like Carl, I've known for many years, we go way back. And we've always had this with clients, that you need to bring the projects in on time and on budget. So I would just leave that as it is. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but I think we could open for discussion now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Frank. Tina and Pip, I may have to defer to you a little bit. When I got bumped off, I'm no longer the host. I can only see the questions that have gone to everyone. I see one by Erin, but I do know, Katie, you had a second question that I wasn't able to get to. Can anybody else see?
I'm not able to see those either. I can see Erin's question, Bob. I can't see Katie's.
Okay, we'll start with what we can see. So Erin, you can take yourself off mute if you'd like and follow up, but you're asking if the presenters could talk about the process of integrating sustainability measures, especially with the building envelope, using more cost-effective measures. How does the conversation with the contractor and owner go? I think Pip brought to us a lot of that integrated conversation, but I will open this up for the group to add some thoughts or expand the conversation on that. Erin, feel free to add if I've not carried that forward. clear.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, Pip did go into it some. I know with building envelope and with the goals to get like an R40 on our walls and R60s on our roofs, it's a lot of insulation and it's always a conversation. And when we go to value engineer, I feel like some of these sustainability practices that we're trying to make more standard are new to clients and contractors, more or less on the contractor's part. And it's just, it seems like a lot of the time it's one of the first things on the table to sort of axe, but it has long-term effects.
Great, thanks.
I just to add to that a little bit, one thing that I've found is that it's important that when you're looking at the long-term effects that Aaron's referring to, and you're looking at the capital costs in the beginning versus the savings down the road, it's important for the people who are managing the capital costs to understand the importance of the operational costs. It may be a different group in the community, school, public facilities department. So as opposed to the school department in Boston, public facilities builds, schools operate. And it's important for people to understand the holistic economic effect of these sustainable measures on the community as a whole, not just their particular discipline.
Great, thanks, Pip. Does anybody else have any questions they want to add? I have a handful myself. I might work backwards and maybe to, appreciate Frank, you really putting it back to us as architects. We certainly are all here with a lot of experience. And I guess the only thing I'll say and maybe prompt for discussion is that we do see also within the MSBA, we have the designer cost comparisons. They will evolve, as projects come and go. But we do see firms that have projects on both ends of the spectrum. And I have to believe, and I guess at one point in time, one snapshot in time, my firm did as well. And we do know that some of it can be based on the very, very unique conditions. It could be, a very large school should gain some efficiencies that a smaller school can't. There are specialty schools that do drive the costs, but I think we can all appreciate that that we, your comments, that we are all as the architects, we have a great responsibility here to, and that's one of the reasons why we're having this discussion, to learn from each other and to be stewards of this and to kind of watch the bottom line. I appreciate that among all four panelists here that there was some overlap, almost dovetailing pretty well together, a little bit of commonality, but also very, very different. I don't think we didn't really script this. Kind of everybody came to the table with some of their own experiences, and I appreciate that it covered some pretty broad ground. One of the questions or maybe comments I have, circling back to Carl, I think you were talking about challenges for districts, or actually, see, I didn't write the question too clear, but doing more with less, limiting the scope and size. I guess one thing that came to mind to me there, I don't know if others experience this, but a lot of times we're seeing it's a trend towards consolidation, or taking multiple schools and doing them, combining them, basically. So rather than limiting scope, somewhat expanding, or if there's a central administration, district administration piece, sometimes wrapping that into a project. And I think in my experience, the reason we're seeing that, and sometimes the scope of a project maybe growing or exploring bigger planning solutions or district-wide solutions, are that people feel that they have kind of one bite at the apple here. Getting in the MSBA pipeline, if you've got multiple elementary schools, to do one elementary school and possibly not be able to do the second or the third for 10 years represents a short-term inequity. And that's one of the conversations that I hear a lot in districts, and it sort of tends to push the scope, or at least the project, up a little bit. open that up for others, similar experiences or
Well,
thoughts
as you
on
know, in the old days, we would often go in a community, do a study, a system-wide study, and then they would need additions to, say, 3 elementary schools. And we would do them as a single project with a single contractor and add to all 3 and renovate too. So this was a fairly common thing until I think somewhere along the line there was, I don't know if it's part of the legislation or what, but each community gets 1 project. You know, sometimes that's not, the solution happens when they combine those 3 schools instead of building additions, small additions on each one and keeping the neighborhood schools. They're building a larger schools. So maybe some flexibility in that would be helpful to, I think part of the problem is the MSBA requires that a district tell you what their project is and then do a feasibility study. I mean, all my training has been you do the feasibility study first, and then you can decide through your various means which was the best one and most cost effective for the time. So that you might want to look at that. I mean, it just makes sense. Why do the feasibility study after you've already decided? First you do the feasibility study and then you decide. That might be helpful in sort of zeroing in on what projects should be coming up at any given time. And I know that was, I don't know if it was written in the legislation or whatever, but it might want to be looked at. It might help select projects come up that are more in line with what people's expectations are.
To jump in here for a second, just to add to that, I think the MSBA has been fairly flexible recently in looking at schools. Sometimes the district will apply for a high school project, say. In the process of doing that feasibility study, they also are looking at their middle school. And so MSBA has allowed, in some cases, them to construct a middle high school instead of just the high school. So I do think there has been some flexibility from MSBA on that, depending on what shape the district is in.
Well, please don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing MSBA. I think it's a great agency.
No.
And so I just think sometimes input from the field. Some of us have been around a long time, and we, some of the old practices might be useful even today.
Sure. No. I didn't mean to criticize you either. I just wanted to bring that up because that is sort of a way for a district to minimize their costs, because they're building an auditorium for 2 schools, 1, commercial kitchen for 2 schools. So that is a savings sort of measure that can be taken.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in each of those cases that we're aware of at HMFH, the MSBA actually required a feasibility study be done to look at the costs of a middle school and a high school or a middle high school before there was an agreement to allow the school to be combined, the schools to be combined.
No, there's the other issue I thought was important was the early site packages. That's really, I think, a way of saving quite a bit of money. If you can get your demolition done and your site prep done ahead of time. We had that experience in a school we did in Marlboro not too long ago. And had a very difficult site. We had to build retaining walls. We had to, in order to enlarge the site. And that took place over a 6-month period while we were designing it. And so the contractor came on board and was able to build, and it was very economical, went very quickly, only 18 months for construction, as opposed to would have been probably at least 24, maybe up to 30 months. And that's a way of saving money and also getting the projects in quicker. So yeah, early site packages, I'm 100% in favor of it. There was a time when I know the CMs were saying that they would, you needed to get a CM because you need to have early site packages. And we've been doing all of us know we've been doing early site packages for a long time. And you mentioned that about we're becoming sort of CMs in a way. And I remember at Build Boston years ago, I did a seminar called The Architect as Co-Construction Manager. And that was to that very point. we end up doing a lot of the stuff that, traditionally may not be in our purview, but we do it because it needs to get done. And these early site packages are a good tool for moving projects forward and holding the cost down as well.
I see a question. We all see a question from Anne, prompting for that. As we see increased focus on outdoor programming and site design, do we see the site costs bearing similar pressures that the material costs are experiencing?
But we do. We certainly do. I think. I think as we see more programmed outdoor learning space, that's changed the kind of paradigm of what a lot of people thought a school was, which was drop off, parking, ball fields, right? But now you've got this other kind of in between space, which is so useful. And I find it's a target often for value engineering. I mean, it's kind of right up. It's become one of those new low-hanging fruit pieces that CMs like to put out there. Well, do you really need that seating area? Do you really need that planting beds? And happily, most educators, I think, probably based on the pandemic, have been sort of pushing back. And I think if they're thoughtfully designed, you can incorporate them, and they don't have to be super expensive, but they seem to have a big target on their back. And of course, with the 8% cap on reimbursement, districts are sensitive to what the site costs are. And some sites have, as we all know, pretty extensive costs just to get stuff underground, let alone what you see above ground.
I think one of the differences, if I could, on site costs, though, is probably a greater percentage of the cost is in labor, not in materials. And so in that sense, it's not quite parallel to building material cost escalation that we're seeing. So that's probably one thing in its favor, that maybe we can get, until labor costs creep up as much as the significant increase in material costs, we can still get more earthwork done and so forth. Yeah. I think the other reason that site amenities get attacked in value management is that they can be postponed. They can be a future phase. And you can do it without totally eliminating that scope. If you can, identify a reasonable contingency, then as the project progresses and you don't spend that contingency, then you can incorporate those site amenities at the end of the project.
Bob, can I add something to that? So
Please.
I think we're going to start to see a lot of the site costs go up. There has been tremendous pressure on materials, and we cannot get materials, and that is driving site costs, driving product selection. The cost of gasoline is really impacting the cost of asphalt and petroleum impacts. Everything has to get trucked to our sites. We can't get underground drain pipe. At this point, we're looking at 24 months for material. So we're now drilling pipe on site to make it perforated on some of our projects because we literally can't get it. So I think we're going to really start to see an impact of the material shortages increase our site costs where they had been sort of safe before now. And so where we didn't have labor before, we now have somebody out there drilling holes in pipe just to make it perforated. So now we're getting hit with those issues. So I think we're going to start to see a lot of pressures on our site materials where we didn't before.
Thanks, Lorraine. Other thoughts and questions, or does anybody from the group want to share ideas that you have? Not being a panelist, again, I know most of us have a lot of experience and could have been panelist members ourselves.
I just like to mention, Bob, thanks again for organizing this. And I think the other value that we can all bring, in our close relationship with MSBA is to sort of have a regular session with them, maybe on an annual basis, semi-annual basis, to review cost information. They have such a great data bank, and share this kind of as an ongoing conversation. One last point is just that the chart focuses on cost per square foot. And as I said, sometimes we want to think about total cost, not just cost per square foot, because some of the budgets can be affected by the size of the program, the size of the scope, and that's really what's impacting the taxpayers, not just the cost per square foot for the buildings we design. So thanks.
Yeah, great idea, Carl. We agree.
You know, Bob, the one thing we haven't really talked about, but we're seeing, and I'm sure everyone's seeing, costs go through the roof is on the furniture side. We do a lot of FF&E, and I mean, availability, shipping, supply chain issues. You know, we've had reps tell us laughingly, well, don't order furniture with steel in it because, you know, you can't get it. So I think that's going to continue to be a challenge for us. We're seeing lead times that are crazy long and items unavailable. That's become a real challenge. I'm sure others are seeing the same thing.
Excellent. I see a few.
I was introduced. Does anyone see prognosis for change?
What's the question?
I said, does anyone see a prognosis for a change in this crisis we're in with the supply chain?
You
Yeah,
mean getting better or getting worse?
it will change.
Several estimators have tried to see this as kind of a blip, but that, you know, that the bubble will come back down. The trend is still upward, but certainly not at the pace of the last couple of years. But
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm hearing the same thing, Carl. But we all have our crystal ball, and no one's correct until it happens. So, you know, we've been seeing this price escalation that's been nothing short of breathtaking over the last 10 years. You know, we were doing schools at $200 a square foot a few years ago. It's just amazing right now what's going on. But you know, we also had done some work in New York City, and I remember when we first went down there, they were doing stuff at $500 and $600 a square foot, and I said that's unbelievable. I said that's 3 times what we're building schools for down here, and then now they're over $1,000 a square foot in some schools. So I don't know when that goes back. They're talking about inflation happening, so maybe everything gets adjusted upward.
Yeah. We have just a few more minutes.
It makes sense to borrow it now because if you can borrow, you know, $50 million today, and it's going to be worth $150 million in 20 years if you were to pay it out. Yeah.
There's a handful more questions I want to get to. Chris, did you want to unmute and ask your question to the group?
Sure, Chris Armstrong. And this comes from my roots in walking several miles in my architectural shoes, a few miles in commissioning shoes, and now my current role with PACE. But have any of the teams found the commissioning process, specifically owner's project requirements and basis of design documentation, useful for maximizing integration and first cost trade-offs in managing the VE process on your projects?
I don't know, Chris, we generally see commissioning as a way to, you know, tighten up the documents in general. So as Frank pointed out, that's certainly a value when the contractors can see that the documents are well coordinated. That you might say is a value of early commissioning that results in cost savings.
Yeah.
To that, I think, especially on the envelope, we've had exterior envelope commissioning agents on our buildings, and they're really helpful to tighten up our documents. So I think we've definitely seen it on that end.
Yeah.
Lorraine,
have you been able to use that early documentation to get the first cost trade-offs with your mechanical systems? I know sometimes it can be a struggle to get your mechanical engineers to believe that the envelope's actually going to perform above and beyond what the minimum requirements might be.
There's a natural conservatism there where they're worried about those extra cold days and want to make sure the system's large enough to handle them and so forth. But I think generally the engineers are working on a theoretical basis anyways, that yes, the envelope is going to perform, and they're basing their system sizes on that.
Thanks, Chris, for the question. We're right on our time. I did want to, Lorraine had one more, not really question, kind of a, I guess it is a question statement. You might want to expand on it, Lorraine, but asking if there are less expensive ways to build.
Sure.
Be great to get the AGC involved.
I mean, I think it's time. We probably had a roundtable with the AGC. I mean, I see it in our job sites. We go out and they're installing things differently. You know, some stuff is prefabricated, some stuff is not on jobs, depending on the contractor. There's definitely savings there, and you know, those savings after bid never come back to the project. You know, and it's not like we're trying to take the savings out of the contractor's pockets, but I think knowing material shortages, knowing where we are at the cost of construction, I think there's probably value there to open up that conversation. You know, pre-construction with a CM when you get the constructability review is one thing, but it's not at the level that we then witness it as it's being constructed. So I think that might be an opportunity for all of us to improve what we do.
A
Thanks,
great
guys.
topic for us for the year with our fellow CMs and GCs potentially.
Well, I appreciate everybody being here, asking questions. I mean, I think we've got a lot that we can even build on. As mentioned, appreciate it, Lorraine, Carl, everybody, the panelists. And please stay tuned. We'll be continuing to look for, we're always open to thoughts and ideas on where we can focus the dialogue and the attention. There are many places these days to kind of things that we can discuss and sort of resolve together. Appreciate everyone's time, and thank you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep.